Another question, if someone would like to ask it.
So the question I wanted to ask is the last definition of the Buddha as savior and protector, which entails, that he has a rupakaya. And I have also heard, like in some Tantra teachings, that in the Paramita there is no real cause for the production of the rupakaya of Buddha, and that you really have to do like highest yoga tantra to create the cause for the whole body.
The beginning of state.
So what I heard is that, so we are saying here that in Paramita the Buddha can create the form bodies through the causes.
Right.
But I heard that in from the perspective of highest yoga tantra, that is not correct. That in Paramita there's no real cause to create the form body. That you really have to do highest yoga tantra to create the substantial. And so my question was on that, and also if Rinpoche can explain like what substantial cause really means, and that will also help me understand
substantial cause.
And
as in
what is a real understanding of a substantial cause for, in this case, the creation of a form body, but in general, because that would also help understand why it's necessary to prove that preceding moment of mind must be the substantial cause in the next moment.
So what's the general meaning of substantial cause, or how?
Yeah, and also that is it true that you also have to do highest yoga tantra?
Right. It is good to hear somebody that the Java said the Shenzhen satu kita dah jumpa di bagi suhu di natural security mungkin cek beras. Ini that's the teman di ngaki lu job kesama ini kita lama lagi cina ini lama lagi lama tembar ini pasal suhu sebenarnya banyak sih tak jauh di satu mana saya di ini di insan di ina ini kacang kepelu di ini suku tu ya di pasal kerja di kapital sambal kerja dan di kor itu sok di pasal senang di sok di sedang di suku tu ya di Dubai di nak bicara di masa seperti harus They don't issue that to never hear di kalau surana istiqlal ini nyeleng jus di kita kalau masih juga di siapa di kasih sampai kasih siapa di mundu rawes repeat siapa di nyeleng di China seperti kata seperti yes kita Città di elenchi della transizione solita, anche una invece da adesso
ma infatti città c'è ma la mela mattina sangue cuba c'è città non c'è città change the spiritual change the change the nada me ti nadi nadi the change the change the spiritual no energy the to share the nada me matin sanche nature yeah fajitika Kasi nada me share you so to ji ti amna ena so to ji de lama suji ji lama suata ya tiarba chesan tu itu dia lama suya lama lama suji ji chesan tu ji sai chesan tu ji tadi sen ji ji ma de si na na mi che na ada sen kata number 2 ya chesan tu tas ji
So the first part of your question, speaking generally, it is the position is held that you cannot achieve the ultimate goal of Buddhahood without resorting to the highest yoga tantra path. And related to that, it is asserted that the highest yoga tantra path, from the point of view of view, is incorporates the Prasangika position on the nature of reality, ultimate truth. Sort of general elements. Then, more specifically, in the Sutrayana, the Buddha's Rupakaya is described. One way of describing it is the physical form that has the 32 major marks, secondary marks. And so each one of those qualities in canonical literature, I believe, gives specific actions that are conducive to the attainment of each one of the marks. So one of them is that going to lengths to greet your teacher by going out to meet them and accompanying the teacher when they leave. Such physical acts are one example of type of behavior that is considered, in some sense, a positive factor for achieving some of the aspects of Buddha's physical body. So from the point of view of highest yoga tantra, that is not accepted because it is said that the nature of that, the causes of that physical body must have some form that corresponds to the nature of that physical body itself. Must have similarity in aspect. And those particular acts don't exhibit that. So you can talk about that for one thing. And then more specifically, the direct cause for achieving Buddha's physical body is then a purified form of subtle air. And that subtle air being the basis for the deity's body. And so that subtle physical air is has two stages to it. One that's called the impure illusory body, and later it's called the pure illusory body. So the impure illusory body, one of the things that's said about it is that even when it's attained, that's something that is finite, and that it possesses that type of illusory body. But because of its character, it will come to a point of like end of its existence, and then it will be replaced by the pure form of the illusory body, and that becomes then the real direct cause of the Buddha's physical. So that subject is understanding that topic is how that claim is what supports that claim. What's the basis for that claim? How do you understand that point?
That is, in Chinese language, Chinese Mari baca ki, mari baca sami le tene puja ni di chansan che. Mati ati ge tani ni supi inge puja tu mari che. That inge puja ni pati puja mashe ni ji shau le.
So another description that is similar to and is related to the points that we just made are the fact that the major marks and secondary marks are not unique to a Buddha. In fact, bodhisattvas prior to their enlightenment, even in the Sutrayana people, are described as possessing them in some sort of lesser form, but they're referred to by the same name. And so what is described about them is to say that the causes for those qualities that are possessed by a bodhisattva can be possessed by a bodhisattva before enlightenment. And the fact is that those the causes, the karma, is accompanied by the traces of ignorance. So the person is still subject to the traces of ignorance, and the karma that is the cause that produces them is also there's a kind of karma which is called uncontaminated karma, and then but it's there's something about the so those are the principal causes for those physical attributes as they are achieved by a bodhisattva prior to enlightenment. But despite the fact that those are the kinds of causes for those attributes, it is not the continuum. The ringa means the similar quality of a continuum that is naturally culminates in a Buddha system. Like it's not accepted that those represent them. So that's kind of the Nyelen Kiku. The Ripa Nama the Ripa Chima the Getty Tagarasaka Masaka Ripa the Quran Injin means the Quran the Nyelen Kiku Ripa Nama Chiku so Katan is Semdel and Nyelen Kiku but there's that Ripa Quran Maldo the Maliba the link to the try and have just Nyelen Kiku Ripa Mahimba Chiari, Karesina, Ripa Chimati, Shabe, Achachi, the Achati, Nikarasu, did a thing in Ella, Mamma to so much very wishes. In Ella, Ripa image of the Amari. Ripa Achachi could be all right, Patayo could be all right, Achachi. Di niente pacha yaris, di bangama sumuris, pacha di bangama di sabarwa, di bangama di sabar pacha di pacha di na mosheran mun diarwa. Then ni tu inde mummi sheva di pacha munne diarwa. Ilu Mishiyamara, Nipu, Meshipu, Nivemu, Nekirba. The devotee I say in the Moshi Mundu, Meshipu, the Nivemu, the Nepa. Here for Moshi, Jojiki, Mudu Shevet Miraba, Mudu Shevatian. In a in the Mama Oshir, Yerba. Then, the analytic years, Bianari, and the next that go to 15 more you need to live in S. Hence, it is Puna Sabe Mata, Neg in which Yerba. Neg in liberty, you won't be a should I read to some change it should I read to go to the piano? Near you put your care of watching it. Yes, you never report how much the Yale Bacha did. You got it. To Yale, when I'm not in Yale, share the way you reach of Marie Bacha is. The Lama is going to reach. To repay the report when you live in the phenomenon to go to the areas. In a grand in your lane, in Jampa, so we're talking about this, you call substantial cause, like material cause, but we're talking about the same thing. The statement is that the first moment of consciousness in a particular life has to be preceded by a prior moment of consciousness. And that must have occurred prior to this life, hence there's a past life. So then the question becomes, well, what do we understand to be the material, the substantial cause for the current moment, first moment of the consciousness or mind in this life? So then the point is raised that that substantial cause is not limited to something that is mental in nature. Mental in the sense of a manifest form of mind. So there's an element of the mind in the sense that its potential or its propensity to become manifest. That also represents part of the substantial path. And so, as an example of that, when we are sleeping, during sleep, typically we go into a state of some unconscious state of mind. There is a mind present there, you're not conscious of it, but the mind is present. There's no sensory consciousness at that time. So sensory consciousness during the time of sleep, especially deep sleep, they don't exist. But when you awaken, right, then you're going to be able to develop sensory consciousness again. So what becomes the source for that sensory consciousness or awakeness? So saying that those propensities, those sort of dormant elements of your sensory consciousness still reside in your mind. So they become part of what we would call a substantial cause for subsequent manifest forms of sensory. So both elements can be identified as part of the substantial cause. And then beyond that, the general meaning of substantial cause, for those who like to hear that, in the case of a seed, the seed possesses, in potential form, the capacity to develop into the sprout. And so in that sense, the seed is the substantial cause for the sprout. And the cooperating factors that are necessary for that to occur are, the incidental elements of the field or the medium in which the seed is planted.
That is, yeah,
One more question. Right. One more question.
I did.
There you are, right.
I know this is a Dharma teaching. A lot of us got Gyumed years ago. You were teaching Yamataka, so as our heart and root Lama, should we practice Yamataka or Gyumed?
감사. 아니, 하여튼 숨죽이가 이상 아니 그거지. 갱송 jampa 그래서는 그네 여백이 이 가시 내만에 아니 민정하게 왕 지가 동안에 두 아니 저희 갱송이 망치 직제 그거를 왕나라에 숨죽이는 그것이 제가 인연이 가래 좀 가면 이랑에 있는 게 또 가래 좀 가게.
This isn't this.
This is your choice. What you prefer.
Yeah, that's it. Time temba Gyumed is temba Gyumed chinta. Temba Gyumed to the sharing but 근데 투지다기 동백님이 tut살이죠. 근데다기
Pramanavarttika.
동백 투지다기 동백 김이 tut살이죠. 저 순도 당연히 스케일이 동백님이 스케일이 tut살이다. 다시 선생님이 이게 그런데 이 순살. 다음에 대신도 대신이 따지 대신이 따지 동백님이 주지가 어디 때에 대신이 따지 동백님이 아니 저에 따지 동백참아 세네가 동백님이 세네 지마리 저에 따지 동백세 재밌게 부르이가 이제 아디니 때야 됐어.
또
또 매일 운동이네. 운동권에
인중 이번에
동가상계 있는 때지. 재미있게 보이는데 방법을 잡았는데 대신 나야지. 이 운동들과
we've already covered the Nietzsche. Okay, so there were the two series of presentations of the four attributes, one in one order, one in the reverse order, and each one of them then plays a role in the process of establishing that the Buddha is a flawless spiritual authority, flawless, or he's a spiritual authority, and we can think of, when we use the word flawless, we mean, in fact, someone who can be recognized as a spiritual authority, or a Semekibu means a person who is a valid source of spiritual knowledge. So we covered in prior sessions mainly the first two clauses of the first series of those four epithets, namely that the excellent and most excellent attitude can be cultivated to its culmination, and the most excellent form of practice, spiritual practice of knowledge, wisdom, can lead to a state of unlimited knowledge. And so those two elements of the discussion have all been covered to some degree. So now the latter two attributes about that address the epithet Sugata and the epithet of being Savior remain.
상태가 시가 시가 끝날 때에 민지주의랑 민지주의랑 온도 속에 자세히 이해했던 거예요. 대기 그냥 이게 주부대 단지 전에 투지가기 감각성이 그거예요. 동가진대 대주의 승리기 부인데 투지증부터 정말을 뭔가 타이징이 기분인데 다 단계들이 그래서 그냥 투지 따기 뭔가 단계들이 싫어 부르는 거죠. 투지 다 장튼 손은 거 통과하고 취해지.
맞아요.
다야 이 투지 뭔가 싫어 그냥 아니 그것도 싫어 부르는데 내가 싫어 돌아 진실을 끊을 때에 네 민지증으로 온도수를 장생 대단한 거가 있는데 나는 멤버 기업에 라미라 라레데 내배 손에 소를 대비 민지 온기 이탑 전등에와 힘은 어제 이게스가
So this is from Denda Harpa's text that this was referred to before, and one portion of his text addressing how to establish, how to prove that the teacher is omniscient. The teacher is someone who has attained Buddha Shakyamuni. The teacher Buddha Shakyamuni has attained then the omniscience of enlightenment, so he formulates. The author formulates 4 ways of 4 reasons, or he addresses those attributes that we've already talked about, causes and the results, as in a particular way to describe an argument that's meant to kind of clarify, as he saw it, the force of what those epithets represent. So he formulates an argument in the following wording. What you read from the text, I actually happen to have a translation. I can read what the text says. So it says, it starts out, the argument has a subject, right? So consider as the subject the Bodhisattva who possesses the same mind continuum as that of Buddha Shakyamuni. So it's saying, it's talking about a cause. So the first epithet is the person who has a desire to benefit the world. So Tenma describes, or more specifically, as someone who is at the very beginning of the path. That consider the Bodhisattva who is of the same mind continuum as Buddha Shakyamuni. So go back to the time when Buddha Shakyamuni was beginning of the path. Right after he's entered the accumulation path. So that means he's achieved bodhicitta, so he possesses the great compassion in that sense. And it says the way he writes the argument is then the predicate of this argument is that bodhisattva at the beginning of the path is capable of developing the wisdom that directly perceives selflessness, right? And that's the second attribute of this quality, attribute of being a teacher. And then he says more specifically, and that second attribute is described in the Pramanavarttika as the epithet of the teacher, because and he's capable of developing that knowledge because he is a novice bodhisattva. Right? He's at the beginning of the path. He's a novice bodhisattva who is under the influence of great compassion. And that great compassion is alluded to and taught in the section of the second chapter that describes that Bodhisattva as being the one who is desirous of benefiting the world. So that's the argument. And then he gives an example, right? So one of the elements of the arguments is to formulate a proper concordant example that supports the argument, the thesis of the argument. And so it says this example is described as follows. So this resembles the manner in which a skilled physician is driven by compassion to seek the means of curing the illness of a sick person who is depending on him or her, the physician, to do so. And then this entire argument, right? So the example is that the physician who wants to find the means of curing someone's illness, that someone means the world, right? He's desirous of helping the world in that sense, their illness. So then he seeks the knowledge that will enable him to do so. And because he has the compassion that is motivating him to find that knowledge. And so then the discussion which says, and this entire argument is explained in the section of the chapter, the second chapter, starting from, and then makes reference to that initial line which says, the proof of the possibility of attaining enlightenment is achieved through the cultivation of compassion. It starts with chapter 34 and continues up to the end of that entire section, is verse 131. So it says that portion of the entire chapter is addressing this argument. So there are various ways of interpreting the argument. One can interpret the arguments in the chapter as proving the ultimate predicate, which is that the Buddha is an ultimate spiritual authority, in the sense that he has achieved enlightenment. And that's the way we were discussing these epithets earlier. Right? Those two qualities, those two causes, can be cultivated to their highest level, and those will result in abandoning all the obstacles and endowing such a person, therefore, with the ability to, in fact, fulfill the aim of wanting to benefit. Here, the arguments are are formulated in a more specific way, or more a slightly different way. So, the second argument is relating to the second epithet, the quality of being a teacher. So, the argument says, then, first argument said, the Bodhisattva has just entered the path of accumulation. And so that person must have great compassion. That's the meaning of the first epithet. And it says that person is capable of developing the second attribute, which is the attribute of being a teacher, right? Which means capable of attaining direct realization of emptiness, because it's driven by compassion to seek that. And the second argument starts by saying, the Bodhisattva, who is the same mind continuum as the Buddha, Shakyamuni, who's the enlightened one, the person who is the ultimate spiritual authority. So the Bodhisattva, who is the mind continuum of Buddha Shakyamuni, but not at the beginning of the path, but rather at the point of having achieved the seeing path, right? And not only the seeing path, but the liberation aspect of the seeing path. Remember, we described that direct realization of wisdom is the direct antidote to the obscurations, and then once those obscurations are destroyed, then that wisdom takes on the quality of being called the path of liberation. Right? So that's what we're referring to. So the Bodhisattva who's reached the Mahayana path of seeing, at the point where he or she has succeeded in abandoning the first element of the obstacle to attaining light. So it's that the person who is the same mind continuum as Buddha Shakyamuni has attained the path of seeing that is referred to as the path of liberation. That's the subject. Consider that person. Okay? Then he is, that is the person who, that's what it means, that is a person who has attained the quality that is referred to by the epithet teacher. That teacher. He now has that wisdom of that directly perceived emptiness and has eliminated some portion of the obstacle. And that person, he or she is capable of developing the three kinds of abandonment that are associated with the epithet known as Sugata, which is the third epithet, right? So that means the one who has attained the ultimate state of well-being, because, and the reasons why, because he's a bodhisattva who has attained the path of seeing and has perceived selflessness directly. So saying the fact that he's reached that level of realization renders him or her capable of abandoning the remainder of the obstacles and therefore becoming Sugata. That's the argument. Okay? And then it gives the example. It says this resembles the manner in which a skilled physician cures the illness of a sick person. So once the physician then achieves the qualities of the abandonment of any limitations to his ability or her ability to cure the person, then he's able to do so. And then it's kind of the final remark is that identifies the verses where this attribute, the attribute of being the teacher, the second of the four, is described in the chapter, which is from verse 32, which begins with the compassion of one, and we read this earlier, the compassion of one applies himself in order to abandon suffering. And it continues up to verse 139. So this discussion covers 7 verses, or I guess 8 verses. And then it ends with, so that means this section on the second half, that ends with the line which says, these two, meaning the desire to benefit the world and the quality of being the teacher, are referred to as causes. That line says these two are referred to as causes. So that marks the end of the discussion of that section. So then the third argument, reason, is addressing the attribute of being Sugata. And the argument is formulated as saying the being who is the same continuum as Buddha Shakyamuni, right? Then at the moment, at the very first instant, that omniscience is attained, very first moment of attaining supreme enlightenment, at that point, one is a Buddha Arya, one is enlightened, one has achieved enlightenment, and that is how to take the third epithet of being the Sugata, because that first moment of enlightenment occurs when all the abandonments, all the obstacles are in fact eliminated, and that's how the third epithet of Sugata is meant to be understood. So that's the subject of the argument. Sugata is referring to the Bodhisattva at the moment that he or she has attained the first moment of becoming enlightened. And that subject, Rangula Kyovesheve Kam Tempe Shender So it says, then the predicate of the argument is that being at the first moment of enlightenment is capable of developing the perfection of others' aims, as is represented by the fourth attribute, which is the attribute of being the savior, right? And so the notion of being the savior is identified with this argument. The moment following that, when the Nirmanakayas are emanating. Nirmanakayas at the first moment of enlightenment have not yet been. Then, yet, when the first moment of enlightenment is achieved, that subsequent moment when the Nirmanakayas can be emanated, and at which point they will represent thought of being savior, because the Nirmanakayas are the ones who teach to others. So that predicate is that when they reach that point of enlightenment, they're capable of developing that aspect of becoming or of manifesting in the Nirmanakayas. Why? Because they've attained the status of the ultimate abandonment, where all the three forms of obstacles are fully eliminated, and therefore when there's nothing to prevent one from becoming the savior who teaches others. And then the example for that is then the person who has become a skillful physician, right? So when you become enlightened, then you're the supreme physician, and that supreme physician will carry out the act of saving the lives of those persons who are ill, and will do so without having to be honored, or without having to be requested, or without the need of anyone showing him some niyapura means then to make offerings to him. Oh, please save me, or to make the request to be saved. The supreme physician will just do so out of his compassion.
Number
So so once that ultimate knowledge, or once those obstacles have been eliminated, there's nothing to prevent that person, that being, that enlightened being, from acting on behalf of others, and that will be done without the need to be, what's the word, supplicated. You don't have to ask the Buddhas to save you. The Buddhas will manifest their enlightened activities spontaneously wherever they will be most effective. So the example is like that. A skilled physician will carry out his his knowledge, his trade, or his skills. He will apply his skills without the need of being asked to do so.
Remember Chebe, Gyumed, Bring not to the Chimba Chine,
So the fourth argument is related to the final epithet, the epithet being Savior, Goa. And so it says, now we've reached the point where we're talking about Buddha Shakyamuni, Jampa. So all the three other arguments were describing different stages up into the final moment of enlightenment. So now, Jampa is Buddha Shakyamuni. That's the subject of the argument. Then that that being, he is the spiritually authoritative person. He's the person who we can rely on infallibly about spiritual goals as seekers of liberation of ourselves. Then Gyumed, that person, what that means to say that he is such is he is the omniscient one who knows in their entirety all the means by which one can become liberated or delivered from suffering. And then, why can we make that assertion? Why is that the predicate of the argument? Because then he has become Savior. The meaning of the epithet of Savior is so it says Wangi, right? By the power of compassion. So compassion is culminated. Then just as he himself has accurately seen what all the means are for freeing oneself or anyone from suffering, by the power of compassion, then he has the ability to save others by revealing that knowledge unerringly to others. So he is a person who has gained that ability or that power, the power that is inherent or is implied by the epithet Savior, and that power is one which is perfect. The Tachiba means it has been brought to its completion, and having achieved that status, then it has the ability to save others by teaching them those unerring methods. That's the argument. The last part of it is explaining that we can say that about him, that he is the infallible spiritual authority, because he's attained that ultimate quality, that power that enables him to save others by teaching them. So the example that's formulated here is this resembles the manner of, for example, a skilled physician. So that skilled physician will be able to provide the medicine or the healing the means that will overcome an illness in an unerring manner. Means without showing how to apply the medicine in the proper order or sequence or manner, and in that way establishing the sick person into a state of well-being where he or she is free of illness. And then he identifies verses one. This is now the end of this first part of the chapter, which is around verse 135, 146, which is describing the attribute of the Savior.
Happy is the teaching good enough that not too much of that semi this knowledge. That is that is basic knowledge.
Okay.
That is the that basic 잡았는데 그니까 이 다자가 좀 같이 basic 잡았는데 나 남지게지 담보는데 basic 잡았는데 또 basic 잡았는데 나지 네 동가시 좀 같은 basic 뭐는 나는 좀 같은 basic 이제 저는 그 시도 뭔가 다른 쪽에 싫어. 잡았는데 나지 솔직히 선 놀라 피해시를 굳이적으로 뭔가는 düşünü지. 따뜻 되는 나지 따뜻
So this is a description of the reasons as they relate to the forward order or the original order of those four epithets that are mentioned in Dignaga's statement of and they can be summarized as saying that the Buddha is the spiritual authority because he is the savior, correct? So that process culminates with proving the existence of the attribute of being the savior. So once you reach that point and you establish that, then that's we can kind of take all the whole presentation of those four epithets and say, because he is the savior, right? Because he has that ability to that unerring ability to teach the means by which seekers of liberation can attain their own freedom, and that ability is based on the fulfillment of the knowledge in which he achieved that understanding in relation to himself and convey it to others. That's the basis for establishing that, in fact, he is the Semekyibu. Semekyibu means the ultimate spiritual authority. And then Rinpoche said, the reverse form, it goes in the opposite order. It says, so then the reverse order is working from the realization of enlightenment and establishing what are the necessary conditions that that led to that ultimate state of life. So the state of being a savior, and is the whole discussion about the Four Noble Truths that we've been discussing in the last 2 days. That's meant to indicate how he is the savior. He's the savior because he taught this unerring message. And he attained that status by having achieved or become the Sugata. And the Sugata in the reverse order is not about the abandonments of the obstacles, but it is on the types of knowledge that are possessed by enlightened people. And then those ultimate forms of knowledge are attained by the quality of being a teacher, or that wisdom that perceives selflessness correctly, and cultivating the first epithet of great compassion.
우리 조방이 주스나 주스 조방이 되는 여부 네 방도 조방이 주스나 이 중에니까 동가지 처음에 주고 제지 내가 또 저기 딱히 딱히 주도지 아니 동가 처음에 주고 신경 이제 시기 근데 시기です동가 주고 시기 시기 중에가 생각이 가야가 제지 시기 Gyumed 아버지가 시디아에 아니 여기에다에 동가상에 준비된 준비 기구인지 아니 그런 수지 그런 수지 네 대신 수지 아주스 수한테 말하다 이게 시기 남간에 시그레스는 동가지 이 저가 순주 저가 순주제 아니 방법 순주 할때까지 또 대시가 방법이니까 남간에 시그레스는 남만의 제베스 남들의 제베스 제가 수치적으로 저기만 가지 제베스 다른 수치나 그나마 투인도 투기 정도로 이 동가 당내도 시를 공간에 남진의 중거리 있습니다. 다 주상주 미래 남진의 양순환의 중거리 있습니다. 저는 중거리 같아 남간의 중거리 시입니다.
So the two presentations are meant to establish two kinds of causes. One is called Gyeje Gyu. Gyeje means the productive cause, or the cause which brings something about. In the sense of what is the generating cause of the result of enlightenment that can establish that the Buddha is the ultimate spiritual authority. So those two qualities of compassion and wisdom are the main causes that produce the attainment of abandoning all the obstacles and achieving the quality that gives you the ability to teach to others. So those four topics then are meant to refute the mistaken notion that there are no genuine causes that can bring about the attainment of enlightenment. And then the reverse presentation is a way of explaining the causes that make known how one becomes one can verify that the Buddha became the spiritual authority. So the evidence of his being the savior is that he taught the Four Noble Truths unerringly. And that's evidence that he must have attained the state of being a Sugata in which all the perfection of knowledge is attained. And the attainment of the perfection of knowledge must have been preceded, in order to possess that quality, must have been preceded by the wisdom that precedes selflessness. And the motivating cause that prompted that had to be prior to that had to be a precondition for that, which is that you wanted to benefit others. So that presentation in reverse is makes known the causes that make known the reason why we can be certain that the Buddha is a true spiritual effect.
That number chani ki butu bhavati. That bhavati kariyasena. Ishara tanda batadi di nyam. That ye toji toji ikadis. Lesson. Sanjay Gavanam Gyumed Tatsu Jampa Lamdo Sumbati Sanjay Rani Tatila Lamdo Sumbati Sanjay Krangu and the chain as Sumbari, they matching the Jampus Sumbres, Alger Chippy. Sanjay Rani Tati Leper chain as Sumbari in Javachi is. Each other and to first Asian Chadu. So she does not have a language. Now she Taki and the upper chamber. Nanda moved to Swan in this study. Rani chamber. That is Sangi was going to Asian Sumbati. Rangi China Sumbari, China Sumbari, Toji Jay. That is China Sumbari, Kalasani, Chamber Namdas, Suaiva, Chambati, the Tunele to the Touch, Asian Lando, Jetu, Chitasu, Sunata, Sanjay, Nacho, that is. Subdata level children, Jampa Nanda Moon to Swan Hindi, Subdata children Malo to Gyumed, Javananda image. That is Chindi Malo Karte Suna, Rani, Taking the two boys, but the Japan Kawa is Java. Yes, Chindi Malo Karte, Chindi Malo Karte, Rani is sympathy. Sympathy, singing, just the Sundi Nanda is Brandy, Tempati, Chimpi Maloka Temple. Chimpi Maloka Temple, the Niki, Nusun Sympathy for is. But the teachers and Lando, Jepichi Malo, Dandy, Marty, Church. Chamber Nanda Moon is my teaching Malo. Javananda Yibisel. Then a cancer with time at the Kashim. That cancer with time at the Sanjit Kati. As a time with the children, Chimalo. He is a picture of an Islam. Chimalo, cancer with time. And the conclusion becomes so it is. The matter of achieving the family is that talking the Japan power in Japan. But the go to Duna, as I tried to go to Duna, as I tried to change my lover to my damage. How go to go to that? Go to Josuna, to be my love. That is Shannon Jimmy Mother to Rangi. She usually see that other just and children on the moon. How to be at that? It is the children on the moon to not have reality. Need to reality, what it is.
Children on the moon.
Oh, it's a meeting with dance.
So the text formulates a similar series of moral arguments that we did not address directly, but also mentioned in the text. And the following section of it, of this particular work, then says that the next topic is the purpose or the aim, the reason why we need to establish that the teacher, Buddha, as a teacher, a spiritual teacher, is an ultimate spiritual authority, and that status of being ultimate spiritual authority is equivalent with his omniscience. So why do we need to establish that? So then formulates an argument that is describing that purpose, or how that purpose is addressed. So it says, if you are a person of intellect, person of intellect, inquiring person who has wisdom, has the faculty of wisdom, might reflect to himself or herself. Then this fact, this phenomenon that we know historically, that the Buddha taught the methods of how to practice in relation to the Four Noble Truths. What are the things that we need to take up? What are the things that we need to abandon that are implicit or which are incorporated in that doctrine of the Four Noble Truths? They represent the means by which beings can be liberated of their suffering. So that's what they're purported to be, right? So that's what they claim to be. They were so taught. And then we might ask ourselves the question, well, that the historical person that we know as the Buddha, when he taught this, had he in fact already realized the truthfulness of the subject matter that he taught, or not? Did he in fact gain the knowledge of the subject matter that he taught prior to teaching it, or not? Right? The question is that one needs to ask himself is that. And when you consider that matter, then the way the argument is formulated is saying, consider the speech of the Buddha right after the moment that he spoke it. The speech being the topic of the Four Noble Truths. Spelled out a bit more than this. Consider that speech in the immediately following the discourse in which that is given. So the predicate is that it must have been, that speech must have been preceded by a knowledge which properly understood the nature of those methods that were presented in that discourse. Because then we can determine that those methods, in fact, that were taught in speech represent a form of speech that is unerring speech. And so if we can determine that it's unerring speech, then it must have been preceded by correct knowledge of the subject matter that he taught, right? And then there is a verse in the text, in the second chapter, where it occurs, but it's a very famous quote all the time, in which it is said that Tabjung means the goals. Usually tab means means, but there's another form of the word. Usually the word upaya is means. And there's another form of which upaya, which is a participle and means translated tabjung. And that means the goals. So the goals and the means of attaining those goals. If they remain hidden to someone, so if you don't know, but in true sense you have complete full knowledge what the goals are and what are the ways of attaining those goals, then how could you possibly teach them to someone else? So this argument is kind of the flip side of that, saying those goals and the means of attaining those goals were taught. We can examine that speech. We can determine that speech to be flawless. So from that we can infer he must have attained that knowledge in order to have given that That's in the travel in the Q4 So this is described as a so this argument from the evidence of the speech of the Buddha that teaches in the doctrine of the Four Noble Truths how unerringly how to free yourself from suffering becomes the basis for a form of argument that is called Jadak. In fact, means a type of argument that's based on the relationship of cause and effect. So we can infer from the effect the existence of the cause. And the effect is that the Buddha taught unerring, flawless speech. That unerring, flawless speech could not have been given without having been preceded by that ultimate knowledge, which qualifies the Buddha as a spiritual authority. And so that knowledge, that omniscience, is referred to as a condition, a particular kind of a governing condition, without which that result would not have arisen.
집안 가족들이 집안이 껴서 매일 봤어야지. 껴서 매일 봐는 의미야지. 갑자기 이 가족들이 집안 탐제를 그것들 난기 탑이랑이 미시를 진짜. 다시 왜냐면 아니 이 시간은 왜 됐나? 네, 저기 말봐. 재산들은 집안 친구는 접수 당기 그들가 집안에 대하지 들어갔으면서 집안에 대하지 지금 이거 당기 그들도 니가 저지 그래야지. 그 집안이 가사들 집안 친구들과 집안 있는 다 접수 친구들과 겹치고가 접수 친구들은 그 이 방에들이 겹치기나 겹치기나 다시부터 시부터 되죠. 당시 겹치기한 게 좀 있어요. 이제는 이 집들이 겹치고 말아. 근데 한 인지 주고요. 시간을 들어왔을 때는 그 친구들이 쉬는 시간에 장비 그때가 힘시하다. 란 집들이 그 집은 제가 그 집까지 아니 접수 주서들이 집들이 좀 이거 있지. 이 내가 연애야 이 것이 좀 느낌이 있거든. 이 저기는 저번이 이게 또 내가 내실 때 그게 또 집이 그런 거 좋아해요. 어디 숨으세요? 어디 이 집이 안 되지. 데려들이가 대다수의 부부가 상계 교수로 제기 제일 교수는 매일 비교들 집안에 쪽에 타고 나기 미시가 스티브 시간이 시간을 내는 것이 어떤 재산들이 가리키니 그래서는 탑시를 지고 계시는 시간을 좀 더 지니고 그래서 저의 그게 어쨌든 장비이 그때가 수시 그때가 가사기 그가 집을 잡았지 집 잡게 집을 집을 내가 숨기 집을 집을 숨기 집을 그 겹쳐서들이 숨기 집을 좀 왜 내가 이래자 네 겹내시고 힘들어가 내가 뒤에서 도와주는 이스 지내다 겹수를 그때 있는다 아직 겹수를 그때라 난이 겹주는 가사들이 집에들 좀 위로 집어야 돼. 좀 위로 나서 니지 겹디 좀 집어야 돼. 근데 탑 알게 탑이 레버리 체인가 탑의 레버리 체인 가면 가서 탑의 미시브 시가 진짜 시간에 내던 의미가 시간을 좀 지켜봐. 어제 때가 탑이랑 시가 맞을 때 시간을 좀 지켜봐.
인생의 원리
어제 봐. 그 시기에 봐. 지난 사당 신이 그치 지켜를 지키는 마신이에요. 이야기 난 가서지 了不起一些这个心理恰当部分那些题的，也让你人的现在这些学生那些经历的，
现在他的
哎，
他的什么？ He doesn't want anybody to know that your knowledge. Oh. Huh?
先念的是吧？
对对。
了不起的吧？这些的解释呢，这些的。
经嘛，对不对？
给你那些人解，这些那个我真是那里，那些人要让你人的心先做，心那里让你人的参与。
Anybody else doesn't want anybody else to know what you do. Right.
Yeah, just that right.
So this argument is to prove that the Buddha, in fact, does have the omniscience that makes him deserving of being recognized as a true spiritual authority. So the argument directly has that force to it, and then it says, well, what purpose? What is the need? What need is met by establishing that argument? What is gained by understanding that argument or realizing the force of that argument? The main purpose is to show why the Buddha should be regarded as a worthy object to take refuge in. Gyaltsu means that he is worthy of being recognized as someone in whom we ought to take refuge. So the act of taking refuge then can be thought of in a variety of ways. The whole overall subject of taking refuge. One of them is what are the motivating causes for taking refuge, and another one is then what are the attributes of the object in whom we take refuge, among which one is the Buddha Ratna. Why should we regard the Buddha as an object who's a worthy object in whom to take refuge? So in the former case, three reasons that are the causes are fear, faith, and compassion. Usually the two main causes, fear and faith. Fear is the fear that comes from being incapable of affecting your own, bringing about your own salvation, achieving the status of refuge by your own life or through your own abilities. You don't have that, so you're subject to the suffering of samsara, whether it's the specific suffering of the lower realms or the general suffering of samsara as a whole. That apprehension should be one of the motivating causes. Second motivating cause is faith. And the faith is that the Buddhas have all the qualities that will allow you to be able to free yourself from that fear. Number two. And then the third one is that you have to have compassion, not only to seek your own salvation, but also that you're concerned about the welfare of others. That also motivates you to take refuge. So that's the Mahana form of taking refuge. Then from the point of view of the object in whom you take refuge, then especially that word fear, then also comes into play. And then it says that the Buddha is free of all fears. He may not have the ability, right? He may not have the knowledge for how to free you from that fear. So he has that. One of the reasons that he is worthy to take refuge in is because he does have the knowledge about how to free yourself from those fears, from samsara. So that's one necessary cause. The other one is, even if he has that knowledge, he might not share it. He might not keep what he knows to others so that they can gain freedom. So if he doesn't have both of those qualities, then we would not feel justified in taking refuge. So we need to prove both of those qualities. So he has the complete knowledge and that he has the compassion to teach. And so that's what those epithets are in their totality meant to establish. So that's the ultimate aim for understanding that argument, so that we can determine that in fact the Buddha is a worthy object in which we should take refuge.
Yeah, that is the Jampa Jivala, Jampa Jivala,
So this purpose for establishing the Buddha's omniscience, the ultimate purpose for it is to recognize that because he is omniscient and therefore is a true spiritual authority, then it is right or worthy or proper that we take refuge in the Buddha. Why is that so? Why are we justified in taking refuge in the Buddha? So, in addition to the motivating cause of fear, that we have a need, or our own failings, then the reason for taking refuge, the second reason for taking refuge is faith. And the faith in the Buddha, particularly, is that the Buddha has the ability or power to save us. That power coming from, or that ability coming from, is ultimate knowledge. And that's usually the way of stating second motivating cause. So those are, in the Laram, those are the two main motivating causes. But in the oral instruction, then as a form of Mahayana practice, a third cause is that, and that is compassion. That we should have a Mahayana motivation when we take refuge. Therefore, we should not only be concerned with eliminating our own fears or our own problems, but problems for others as well. But in that second cause, the one of faith, which says that Buddha, we should develop a faith in which we are confident that the Buddha possesses the ability or the power to provide us with the means of salvation. It's important to recognize that it's not enough that a Buddha has that power, but also that we can be also confident or sure that the Buddha will in fact act upon that ability, that he will make use of that ability, and that we can rely on the fact that he will do so. So the act of taking refuge is one in which we place our hope in some object, the Buddha in particular. Sometimes we place our hope in something and that hope is unfulfilled. So the act of taking refuge should not be that kind of empty hope. And in order for us to be sure that it wouldn't be, we have to be confident not only that Buddha has the ability, which is gained through having the ultimate knowledge, but also that he is under the influence of compassion, and that compassion virtually compels him to share that. So before, Rinpoche said, sometimes people have the ability or the knowledge to teach another person, but they might not teach another person for a variety of reasons. One might be they themselves are under the influence of attachment or bias, and they might not want to help a certain particular type of person. So they have to have the full compassion that would not limit them in who they would be willing to share that knowledge with, or they would not withhold that knowledge. Another reason for withholding knowledge that often is talked about in scriptures is that certain persons are unwilling to share what they know because they don't want anyone else to gain some unique knowledge that they have. They want to be the exclusive holder of a certain knowledge. So the various types of ways that might motivate someone to withhold their knowledge, to fail to share their knowledge. And the Buddha is not subject to those limitations.
reject the Kavala to the individual the shade to the room of the Tibetan, but it is so I'm making the children of the Indian which is that is he comes to me to the Latin just can get to do the happiness can get to do
So the ultimate purpose for establishing the authority of the Buddha is to determine that he is the ultimate object in whom we might take refuge. So one way of thinking that we have no reason to doubt that the Buddha might be a valid source in whom to take refuge. One way of knowing that is that because of his compassion, he would never teach something that would not be of benefit. He would never teach anything that would be harmful. His compassion would not allow him to say anything to us that might cause us harm. The nature of compassion is to wanting to free you from your suffering. So that compassion would be antithetical to the compassion to keep something that might be harmful. So we can be confident in who has this object of refuge by knowing that he has cultivated compassion to its highest form. And also, not enough that he has the inclination to be beneficial, do something that will be helpful for us, but we also have to be confident that he would never teach us anything that would be false or inaccurate. And that we can be certain about that on the basis of the fact that we understand to have complete knowledge. So that complete knowledge gives him the awareness of what the correct methods are. So that knowledge is the basis for teaching unerringly what will serve us in a spiritual sense. And among those forms of knowledge, among the methods that he teaches, then the most important method that he teaches is how to gain the wisdom that precedes self-knowledge. Especially that's the unique form of knowledge that only the Buddhas possess.
That in Yenan Jibale don't live the character of the person. When gets it, it's in the jail to just the Jibu ceremony use. That is the nation is a Jibale don't live the character. He gets it.
So, by virtue of these points, that he would never teach anything that is harmful, based on our understanding of his ultimate compassion. And he would never teach us anything that is false or inaccurate based on his ultimate knowledge. Then we can conclude from that because he does in fact provide the refuge or provide the means of freeing ourselves from our fear, through teaching the means of gaining the ultimate form of refuge, then we can conclude that the Buddha alone, it says the teacher of Buddhism, our teacher, the teacher of Buddha Shakyamuni, he alone is the supreme authority, spiritual authority, in whom it is proper to take refuge.
Earlier in the week, Rinpoche very kindly and repeatedly addressed the issue of the definition of valid cognition. And I just wanted to make sure that particularly in relation between Prasangika and presentation of this text, I just wanted to make sure that I understood it correctly. So the reason that perception is simply unmistaken and not necessarily new is because perception is unmediated and non-conceptual, so that when we perceive an object, we're perceiving a momentary object non-conceptually, directly. And so every time you look at an object, you're seeing a new moment of it. So adding new would be redundant, as I understand it. But in the presentation here, Rinpoche was saying that perception has two aspects, a subjective aspect and an objective aspect. At the objective aspect, the sonam, in the case of perception, say the color blue, you perceive the first moment of it, and at the same time there's a subjective aspect, which would be a mental image, which would be, I'm asking.
Indirect perception?
He said, well, what is the nature of the subjective aspect, if not conceptual, right?
It's perception.
He said that perception has two aspects, an objective aspect and a subjective aspect. Right? And my understanding would be that the objective aspect would be the phenomenon, say in the case of the color blue, right? You see blue. But that the subjective aspect would be a mental image. I mean, this is
yes,
my question.
Right?
So in the first moment of perception, you would see the object and you would form this mental image. In the second moment, you would see another moment of the object, but the subjective aspect would remain the same mental image. And hence, this is my...
Okay, I'm
following it.
I guess.
Okay. And this is my question. Right? So is that the reason then that only the first moment of perception would be valid? Because in the second moment, the mental image remains the same.
I mean, you're saying that you heard that?
No, I'm trying to make sense of this. And I'm presenting how it seems to be.
And you're saying this is from the point of view of the Chittamatra school and why they say only the first moment is correct perception.
Right, and my understanding of how this has to do with the objective aspect and the subjective aspect. And
all right, I don't know that I'm going to do this correctly, but I'll try.
Okay, so I guess then the final bit would then be that if you define valid cognition as, perception as Dorpatan Droshin Matrole Ritva, a knower that is unmistaken and non-conceptual, would then the non-conceptual part apply to the objective aspect and the unmistaken part applied to the subjective aspect. True way. Does one part apply to the objective and the other part apply to the subject? Sorry.
Rinpoche tango samagi korti, dote samagi korti, mansung kalsa. From mama share, ani ngai from the persona kayo tingaya. Tata si pagore telaku. Drop so sena. From the samla takar sat samla bilu. Ani from Cuba menjadi satu bilu pasti. Seme sini satu Cuba. Ini France ta. Mama share takar sat. Monsoon sama, kadang monsoon sama ke sisa jenis share perangkat. Jadi Jawa sama ke ini monsoon sama nama ini kalsa, monsoon sama di yul di toge ada. Ini toge yujen di yoras kalsa di. Sama di yujen di yul di toge mana. Kisi tanggul cik kalsa, kau jawab nanti tak tentu never TikTok jawab insan orang sama universiti, ada sesuatu program. Yang dikuan di laut, di kalsa semagi kerja di situ mana yang satu milo canggih mana yang kalsa. Krantilah mana tertitik kalsa di sini ini Rinpoche ke kalsa ceme chair macam itu jadi lola sahwe pun tunggu wadi di Quran di jengo biara ini Quran semna di situ mana kos tungnam dan tungnam kecil kau boleh. Quran semna lah. Jinam di Quran semna jinam sen di yujan figure. Sungnam sen di yula figure. Tadi kau kecil kau semua sambil tu translate. Sungnam sen di yula figure. Jinam situ mana? Tak kansan kena membuat zimbelo, zinam, peran, itu soal sekolah. Dari kecil tamu adalah kalsa. Kau di musim tu, you di Tokyo yang musim sana. Kecil niat adalah kau sama main berkacau orang sana. Kecil niat adalah ani peran you di mitawa insan kau tak ada yang mana kau cipta insan. Ini jadi ni model kotak ini na, tok sukan dia tahu resmi kok janji kau ni cipta hujan resmi. Yang Fransam dia sudah cipta. Jangan janji saya di the mental image part you're saying that represents the mental aspect. Let's see. Jangan di dinam ke tanda suci. Kau janji juga. Kau dinam saya di kasih juga. Kau janji kita kasih. That degenerates. You're asking if that's correct way to understand it.
Yeah, and then that the second moment.
The change. That is kesi ni berarti kalsa. Kau tahu mai berarti kau janji tu kau ini kau tahu mai siapa malas. Jadi kalsa tahu mai siapa ina ane kalsa. Kalau saya di musim sama di matru bagi lo di Google. Yang tahu mereka uji, tahu mereka siapa di Google. Kita kecil ni mesti janji tu ke, tahu ya jangan kau tahu mereka main bahasa cari ya jangan kau terima kau jangan malas itu. Tadi drop di perang di kawan itu tidak kerasa. Kita tak ada reverse juga.
Ini kita siapa cuma celing dia, siapa cuma celing dia, kong ni.
Jabba.
Jabba cuma celing dia.
Oh, Jabba.
Jabatana,
Jabatan?
Jenny Gear is
Okay.
Sentamba,
Jabatan Kali.
Keva, near Sato Kenny, Jabatana, Sato is in the
Starting in
did Tobarba,
Okay.
Nusunarba,
Okay.
just a Sato, Nusuni to be on
Okay.
the Tobaya, Tobala Sato, Vijita Kenny, Sato Toya.
So, just sort of to, if I erred in any apology, if I correctly represented it, then what you responded to how I represented what you said. You said, so for just as I described it, his immediate response to that is, well, consider this. So the yoga charms certainly don't limit their definition of knowledge, of tema, to direct perception. There also is such a thing as inference. Inference is also a form of pramana, correct cognition. And the nature of inference is such that it is not aconceptual. It is a conceptual mind. And so, because it's a conceptual mind, therefore it perceives its object via a mental image. Nevertheless, that conceptual inference, they would describe it as a new form of awareness. So just because something is occurring by way of a mental image does not deprive it of the ability to be described as a newly attained correct cognition. So that seems to sort of, what should I say, give you something to maybe redefine the way you were describing why direct perception is only that first moment and not the second. So
I guess my question then is, what is the status of the Zinnam? Is the Zinnam conceptual or non-conceptual?
But what? So explain to me what you mean by Zen.
So I thought the Rinpoche said that with regard to perception, direct perception has two aspects.
Right.
An objective aspect and a subjective aspect.
It does, but I'm not sure that go ahead, finish it.
So the question is the subjective aspect conceptual or non-conceptual?
Jadana ane Rinpoche ki sunduga tapi kran piche chukya di ranrik di kor chukya. Har sena kana munjin mikshe di la munjin mikshe kora rang sunam roa munjin mikshe sunam re. Kora dan jupte chik kar jupte chik pa di ki ranrik chukya re. Ranrik di sunam roa kora chukya. So you're mixing it up by saying that the Zinnam refers to conception. The Sungnam means, Sungnam is not talking about the object. Sungnam is talking about a type of mind.
And it is.
Sungwati Okay. So when you say Sungnam, it's the sung of Sungnam is the object. So the color blue, for example. But and so then Zin, right? In Zinnam is referring to the self-awareness, which is simultaneous with the perception of blue. It is a subjective quality of the mind that perceives not the blueness, but perceives the kind of the sensory consciousness that perceives blue. But the sensory consciousness itself that perceives blue, that is Sungnam. Sungnam is not the object, it's the eye consciousness that directly perceives. And it's called Sungnam because it's perceiving a dualistic object. Zinam means another kind of mind that only holds mental state. So the object of the Zinam is the eye consciousness. And it's sort of like the witness. The witness is the Zinam. It's not conceptual. It's directly experiencing that eye consciousness. Then the Jeshe Jampa, keep talking about it. Jeshe Jampa is the recognition or the subsequent cognition that is conceptual, identified with memory even, which is typically conceptual, and that is not a form of recognition in this way.
So the second moment of perception, the Jeshe, even though it's a Jeshe, it's
you can say it comes in the second moment, right? And so there are two kinds of subsequent cognitions. Subsequent cognitions that occur in relation to direct perception, and subsequent cognitions that occur in relation to conception. Okay. So there is this so-called subsequent cognition of the direct perception, and then there are other subsequent cognitions of conceptual minds. Both of them are considered conceptual minds, but one of them is generated by direct perception. One of them is generated by a conceptual mind.